Okay, so picking up in lesson P5, we spent Friday solving quadratic equations, right? We solved by factoring, so we practiced that product of AC. You can also just factor into two parentheses if it's just an x squared. We solved by extracting roots, so taking the square roots. We completed the square, we practiced the quadratic formula, and now notice what this last example says. It says solving graphically. Okay, so graphically. When it says solving graphically, I would not encourage you to try and use one of the other methods. I'm not saying you couldn't use quadratic formula or something, but when it says solve graphically, you want to pay attention and try it graphically. That's what it's designed for. So the solutions of an equation, when given a graph of the equation, are the locations where the graph crosses the x-axis. So if you're trying to solve an equation and it's told to do graphically, you're looking for where the graph crosses the x-axis. Also, the x-intercepts. There's also another word we learned last year. And I don't know if you guys remember it or not, but do notice it says to do this. Now this says we'll use our calculator and the trace feature, which the trace feature is okay, but I have a more exact process that we're going to do, okay? So let's look at example 5. Solve the equation x cubed minus x minus 1 equals 0 graphically, which means we're going to graph it. What has to be true in order to graph something on the calculator? Needs to be y equals. Now, in this term, this is just an equation we're trying to solve, right? It's one variable. So what you want to do is you want to make sure, first of all, does it equal 0? It does equal 0, yes. And once it equals 0, then just replace that 0 with y. So this is equivalent to the equation y equals x cubed minus x minus 1. If it doesn't already equal 0, you need to get it equal to 0, and then you can make it y equals. Okay, so how do I graph this on the calculator? Where do I go first? Y equals button here, yes? Okay, so we're going to go to the y equals button up in the top left. And if you have other stuff up there, clear it out. And we're going to type in that equation. Remember to get an x. Right here next to the alpha button is this xt theta n. So that's your variable, yes? So I'm going to use that for my x. It was right next to the alpha button. Then we're doing to the power of third. Do you guys know how to do your powers? Over to the right, right above the division button, is this, I call it a caret, but that exponent button, right? When you type that exponent button, it's right next to the tangent button, it gives you a little box. And now I can fill in my 3. Notice my cursor is still up by the exponent, yes? So what I do is I use my right arrow button to get out of the exponent, and then I continue typing. It's minus x, so again I'm using the xt theta n button, minus 1. Are we okay with typing that? I was trying to go slow for Natalie's sake there, so. Yeah, never even seen it. Okay. Now, to graph it, options. What are your thoughts? Okay, you can just possibly hit the graph button. Now, I have no idea. Yeah, so on my calculator, I don't know what I graphed last. Actually, it didn't work out too bad. But how do we go back to that 10 by 10 screen if you graphed something funky lately? Yeah, if you go into Zoom, and I tend to do this usually, hit the Zoom button right there in that top row, and you either arrow down or hit 6, Z standard. That's going to take you, so when I hit enter here, it's going to take me to a standard 10 by 10 screen. And that gives you a pretty good visual, yes? Okay. I want to know the solution to this equation, right? What would you say the solution is? Give me a guess. Let me ask a different question. Where do we find the solution? Where the graph crosses the x-axis. So just eyeballing that, I don't know, throw out a guess. 1.3? It's a guess, right? Now, is that what I want you to write down? No. I want a more precise answer. Now, the non-precise way, and I'm going to show you this first, because it'll give us a guesstimate, but then we're going to get an exact. It suggested using the trace feature. So you see the trace button? Anytime you push the trace button, it gives you a blinking cursor. And you can use your left and right arrows to arrow over. Now, here's the deal. Do we get a precise answer there? I mean, when my y value is negative, I have 1.2121. When I arrow one more, my y value is positive, I have 1.3636. Well, Ethan's in the ballpark with 1.3. Is that precise, though? No, like I want a specific answer up to, say, 2 to 3 decimal places. So, you ready for the process? We're going to go into the Calc menu. You see Calc is right above the Trace button, yes? So to get to the Calc menu, you use the Second button. So I'm going to hit Second. You guys know the blue Second button, right? That's always how you get to something above. So I'm going to hit Second, and I'm going to hit the Trace button, which has the Calc menu above it. And you get this menu here, yes? It's a very handy menu. It's probably one of the things you'll use the most on this calculator. Value, 0, min, max, intersect, and then a couple of calculus topics. Okay. What's another name for the x-intercept, where we cross the x-axis? Well, it's actually not intersect in this case. It's 0. This intersect, you would have to have two graphs, and it's going to be where do the two graphs cross each other. Okay? Next chapter, I don't know if we'll work with intersect or not, but we'll definitely work with min and max. But 0. A 0 is where a graph crosses the x-axis. So I'm going to hit enter, or I'm going to, hit enter on 0. You ready for the process? Okay. So it's asking me questions. Let the calculator prompts take you through. So left bound, because sometimes there's multiple zeros, multiple places it crosses the x-axis. So it's always asking, okay, which one do you want? So the left bound says, I'm going to move my cursor somewhere to the left of where we're crossing the x-axis. So in this case, just the way the graph's going, I'm going to end up on the bottom part, right? And then I'm going to hit enter. Now, on my graph, you can nicely see kind of a faint vertical line, okay? Sometimes it's easier to see, sometimes it's harder. Now, notice after I did that, now what's it asking? Right bound. So now you have to move your cursor past the x-intercept somewhere to the right. It can be right after the right, it can be way after the right. And I'm going to hit enter again. And notice, if you can see your two vertical lines, is the x-intercept between them? That's ideally what should be happening. Now, for a guess, honestly, usually you can just hit enter here again and you're good. Officially, what guess is though, taking your cursor back to the approximate spot of the x-intercept. Okay, that's my guess because I know it's in that ballpark. And I'm going to hit enter. Notice it's no longer asking me a question, is it? It's telling me. What's it telling me? This is your 0. So my 0, where it crosses the x-axis, is 1.324718. And if done correctly, we all should have gotten the identical answer. Or I think it should be identical. If it's not identical for some reason, well, hopefully it's way farther than the answer, but maybe you slightly typed your equation wrong. Okay, that would be my guess as to why it might not be identical. Okay, so I have 2 decimal places written down in my answer book right here. Does it say how many decimal places on homework? Okay. did 3 for me on homework. So I have 3 decimal places on homework. 2, 3, I'm fine in that ballpark, okay? So now, there's not really work to write down, is there? Okay? If you had to do any solving, I would expect to see the solving. So if we had to move stuff around, I would expect to see that. But other than that, honestly, you can just give your answer here. And I'm going to just trust that you know what to do. Now, for the benefit of the notes, I'm going to sketch a graph. Not exactly the best graph, but hey, it works. And so the answer I'm going to give, I'm going to go ahead and say 1.32, what's my next spot? It's 1.324, but the 7 tells the 4 to go up to a 5. So I'm going to say approximately 1.325. And then, okay, how did we get that, folks? We used Second Calc, so the Calc menu. It's also on the Trace button. And then we went to the 0 option. And then we followed the prompts. And we ended up with 1.324718. So, by all means, here's the deal. When you walk out of my classroom and you get home and you're working on homework tonight, you have to remember how to do this, yes? Granted, you're going to have some work time here in class. But this is, something you need to remember once you walk away from this lesson. We'll use this a lot, folks. This is something you will learn. Honestly, it won't take long for you to learn it. It'll become a natural habit. But this is a trait on these calculators we use a lot. Okay, so write yourself some notes. How did we do this? What do you need? What notes do you need to remember? When you're working on something at home and working a chapter review in 3-4 days, you're like, oh, crud, how did I do that? This is what you need to write down, okay? No one complained along the way. Did you guys all get the same answer as me? Because that's where you have to speak up if, your calculator's disagreeing with me, then you probably just hit a wrong button. No big deal. But let me come troubleshoot it and figure out where you went wrong, okay? So this is the same assignment I told you about on Friday, page 46, 2 through 34 even. You should have been able to get started on a decent amount of them, except for the graphing ones, right? So the graphing, I will say, okay, on 246, I think it says to confirm graphically. Oh, okay, it says solve equation. But then it says confirm factoring. Just factor on 1 through 6. Or I guess it's 2, 4, 6. So factoring on 2, 4, 6. Solving using square roots on 8, 10, 12. Completing the square on 14, 16, 18. Quadratic formula on 20, 22, 24. 26 and 28, you look at their graph and estimate the x and y intercepts. 30, 32, and 34 is what I just taught. So the skills 30, 32, and 34 is what I just taught. So I only taught you 3 problems there. Everything else you technically can do. Based on the fact I'm telling you on 2, 4, 6 to factor. Okay? Let me know if you have questions.